Greetings! The Kagami has returned, and for those who don't know, I've been drawing a manga called Aura of Deities for a while now. At the moment, it is a 95 chapter ongoing battle manga, which you can read right now. Over the course of it, and in the past year especially, I think I've made a lot of progress improving at drawing and writing, and I would like to share that journey of creating Aura with all of you. By sharing this story, I hope that others can learn from my mistakes. The mistakes I made while making this manga. So let's begin. However, first, I'm going to ask you to leave a like on this video and subscribe if you want to see more videos from me, where I talk about creating manga and my art journey, and other stuff. Now, in order to talk about my journey in creating and improving at drawing my manga, Aura, first we must establish a bit of a timeline. I would say that my manga has two eras, pre-third arc and post-third arc. If you've ever taken a look at the first 50 or 60 chapters, you might have noticed that the art and even the story didn't seem all too good, especially considering how the newer chapters look, such as what you're seeing me draw right now. Those first 60 chapters or so are what is considered pre-third arc. But why is the pre-third arc so bad for most of it? And how did I improve so much once I got to the third arc, especially? Essentially, I'm asking what went right. Well, to talk about what went right, first we have to discuss what went wrong in the beginning. There are a number of reasons why the early Aura chapters didn't go well. The first thing is, I was a fool. I didn't understand how things worked. Whenever I looked stuff up, it went over my head, and it was also hard to get friends who could help. The second thing is that while I wanted criticism, I never actually went out of my way to look for it. I didn't go on Discord servers to ask people, like other artists, what they thought of it so that I could improve. And I never asked people what they thought of my work. I just wanted to hear what they thought, but didn't ask, essentially. The third thing is that I never actually studied the fundamentals of drawing at these early stages. And if you ever heard about how artists improve, I'm sure you've heard that they've had to study the fundamentals to get good. And that's something I certainly did not do in these early stages of Aura. And the fourth reason is that I was focusing on finishing my work instead of trying to make it good. Though I will note, it did give me a lot of discipline when it came to making manga, and it made me more invested in my love for creating manga. So I think it was more of a good thing in the long term that I focused on finishing my work rather than making it good, since it taught me something really important. And the fifth and final reason why the first 60 chapters went wrong was because I drew on my phone, and that isn't a good thing. While you can make good art on your phone, improving at it is a bit more tricky. To improve at art, you'd have to do it with a pen and pencil. At least that's what I would recommend as someone who drew with a phone for 4 years. This is not to say that these first 60 chapters are entirely bad. I think a good part about them is the comedy. It's really good, and I think you'd have a good laugh if you read them. Another good thing about them is that I improve at my understanding of using digital media. And when I later moved on to using a tablet and my computer to draw, it was really helpful in that, despite my previous experience being with a phone. So, how did I turn things around? Well, the first thing is that I actually went on Discord and met other aspiring creators. They helped a lot by supporting me and helping me with getting critiques by giving them to me themselves. They also helped me get a better eye for understanding why others are good at art and why others are bad at it. Essentially, they helped me become less of a fool and helped me get criticism, even though I couldn't get it. Another thing is that because my friends were trying to help me, I had to take more time between chapters to get good. And while I was going on more hiatuses, releasing less chapters, it made me improve a lot, both in thinking about the story and making it good, and also about the art and making that good as well. Because of this, I was able to make a good setup for the upcoming third arc by the end of the second. That was essentially the pre-third arc era. But what about now? Well, the post-third arc era has 3 sections: the flashback, the boat, and the reintroduction. Starting with the flashback, this is definitely the dark part of my journey in creating Aura. Early on, I just decided to start finishing chapters rather than taking my time with them, which led to making a lot of bad chapters, even though the first chapter of the arc was actually good. I mainly did this because I was excited to draw the future chapters, and I wanted to keep drawing them. But I just forgot the lessons I learned from before to just focus on improving my stuff, so that each chapter could be good and even better than the last. Because of this, I had to go on hiatus and focus on redrawing my older chapters, and even coloring chapters because I went to black and white. That was also a flaw of the pre-third arc, that it was in color, so I had less time to actually focus on getting good drawings in, but I just forgot to mention that earlier. When I went on my hiatus, I was still on a flashback that was ongoing. It's a long flashback, similar to the kind you see in One Piece, so there was still plenty of the flashback left to go. Because it was a flashback, I decided that I could lay off on the color for just this part of the story, but then go back to color, and also to color the previous chapters before the flashback. During my 8-month hiatus, what I had to redraw and recolor ended up being 5 chapters to redraw and 3 chapters to color, one of which, chapter 70, is still not colored to this day, but I do plan on coloring it at some time in the future, even sooner rather than later. Before I even finished redrawing all the chapters, I also drew 2 other chapters that would come out when I finished redrawing. The flashback chapters I already put out were gonna have a different kind of story, so I didn't want to release the new chapters I drew until the redrawn ones were out, because it wouldn't make sense with the story if they read the old ones first. Once I did finally finish redrawing all the chapters, the last 3 chapters that had to be redrawn, and the 2 new chapters that I drew over the course of the hiatus all released at the same time. It was a huge comeback, and I went bi-weekly after that. Bi-weekly just means that I released a chapter every 2 weeks. The essential lesson I learned from the flashback is that I shouldn't hasten progress. In the best case scenario, it could lead to something that I just don't like. In the worst case scenario, it could lead to a result of a huge setback. Essentially, you should take your time with your work. Now let's talk about the boat. The boat had its own obstacles different from the flashback. For one, I had to color it, unlike the flashback. Its story was a lot more complex when it came to the amount of things I had to deal with compared to the flashback. And lastly, I also had to deal with a lot of stuff emotionally as well during the time I had to draw this. I could even say that the boat arc was harder to handle than the flashback, even though I had such a hard time with the flashback, as was stated with the whole 8-month hiatus, taking a whole year for 10 chapters of the flashback. In comparison, the boat arc only took half a year for 10 chapters, but those 6 months were not that good. I would rather not talk about what made the boat arc emotionally hard on me, but let's just leave it at that. Anyways, back to the story being a bit more complex, because I think this is what I learned the most from, is that I tried to do too much in too little time. While the flashback only had 3 characters to keep track of over the course of 10 chapters, the boat arc had to keep track of 6 characters over the course of the same amount of time, so you can see why it gets complicated now. I had too many running plot lines going on during the boat arc that I had to make readers keep track of, while even though there are the same amount of things to keep track of in the flashback, those were more of a background thing that you didn't have to pay attention to, but were just there. Essentially, what I learned from the boat arc is I should be more natural in the way I tell my story, and let it flow, rather than having a certain amount of chapters I want to tell a certain amount of story in, because that's why the boat arc was so short and so complicated at the same time, in terms of the amount I put in. This leads us to our current section, the Reintroduction Arc, or the Kaze Reintroduction Arc, because this entire time during the 3rd arc, Kaze has not been in the story at all. And for context, Kaze is the main protagonist of Aura, so it's a big deal. This is the part where I'd say I made the most improvement. For one, I finally decided to put my foot down and go black and white even though I was not in a flashback. For 2, I finally switched to drawing on a tablet with a computer, using Clip Studio Paint for my manga. And finally, I finally started studying to draw the fundamentals. And on top of all of that, I was making a really simple story that was actually really good. So it's easy to see why the quality of Aura at this point just had such a huge spike. even when you compare it to when Aura finally actually got good, when it was switching to the third arc. So now that we're caught up with me, where am I in my journey? Well, I wouldn't say I'm even close to becoming a professional yet. There is this thing they say in Japan, where you have to draw 2,000 pages of manga to get good at drawing, or to become a professional. If we don't count the bad parts of Aura, I've only drawn 600 real pages of Aura, and by this I mean everything since chapter 57. This means I'm only 1/4 of the way to becoming a professional. Now, this doesn't mean I'm gonna become a professional in another 5 years. I'm more optimistic than that. I think it'll take just another year or two. I think more 2 years, personally. But what it does mean is that I'm still on a journey to become a professional. And even after I become a professional, I still have a lot to learn. But that's just how it is when you're on a journey like this. With all that said, I hope to use these videos to keep talking about my journey and things like this. And while I may not have been able to keep up my promise of a video every 2 weeks for my last video, due to life circumstance of course, it doesn't mean that I'll ever stop, for I'm going to create a great manga. All my links are in the description below. Please check out my manga, Aura of Diabetes, hashtag skip the first 60 chapters, and check out the podcast channel I am on with my friend Enigma, Anime Authority. This has been Kagami. I'll see you later. Praise the Mantis.